everyone, my name is Marian Guevara, and on this channel we talk about books, movies, and more. A huge hello and a huge thank you to anyone who is clicking on this video. If you're an old subscriber, if you're a new subscriber, if you're just checking out the channel, thank you very much. I appreciate your viewership. Now, I'm a bit behind when it comes to filming videos. I recently came back from a trip to Florida. Came back sick, not 100%, but I need to get these videos out because the new year is approaching and I want to get my list videos done. So the first one of these is my most disappointing reads of 2024. This is obviously subjective. You could love these books and that's perfectly valid. They just didn't work for me one way or the other. So yeah. Anyway, there's quite a bit of them, so I'm just going to start off with the list. The first book we are discussing is What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. Now, I did an entire video talking about this book, going in depth as to why it just didn't work for me. For those who don't know, this is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. And basically, to sum it up, well, first thing, I just did not find this book really all that scary. I did feel that Kingfisher removed what made the original story effective, which was the ambiguity, and then replaced it with a type of horror. I'm not going to say what type because I feel like it would be spoiling, but she replaced it with a type of horror that to me felt undercooked. There was a bit of the anachronism problem I had. This is meant to take place in the 19th century, and at times the characters felt that they were modern. I felt that they were modern. There was humor in here as well that also added to the whole, anachronism problem for me. I don't know, humor and horror doesn't really gel for me, honestly. I'm not really into the horror that, tries to be funny at times as well. I also do feel that Kingfisher devoted a bit too much time to world building. World building that did nothing for the atmosphere, for the dread, the tension. And the thing is, What Moves the Dead is a short book. So you'd think that you're going to use up a lot of this time, like right away, into building up the atmosphere. Overall, What Moves the Dead just did not work for me, especially as a Edgar Allan Poe, The Fall of the House of Usher retelling. Moving on to the second book, we have Painted Devils by Margaret Owen, which is the sequel to Little Thieves. Now, Little Thieves is a retelling of The Goose Girl. It's a YA fairy tale retelling, which had its heyday years ago. However, I actually was impressed by Little Thieves. I was surprised by how much I actually enjoyed it. And I was eager to try out the sequel, Painted Devils. However, I just felt it wasn't as effective as Little Thieves. Painted Devils felt more of a slog to read. I felt that Owen wanted to explore a lot of themes. She wanted to explore our main character's relationship with her main love interest. She wanted to explore her family dynamics. But towards the middle of the book, I do feel that our main character was kind of meandering and going on a lot of side quests. She had to go on a heist. She had to help her friend's family's trading business. It came to a point where, like, what are we doing again? What's the whole point? Why are we in this town? So I do feel that it just overstayed its welcome by the middle. And then when we did reach the end, I felt that everything it was more or less rushed. So yeah, my problem with Painted Devils was mainly a pacing problem because I really felt that Little Thieves was much more tight, much more concise, despite the fact that it is longer. Now moving on to the third most disappointing book of the year for me, and that would have to be Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I picked this one up because it was described as Regency fantasy. So it's a fantasy story that takes place in a Regency-esque world, and people were throwing around, the names Dino and Jones, Howl's Moving Castle as descriptors for this book, so that got me even more excited. However, I think my main gripe with this book was the fact that, one, it's just too short for me. It's less than 250 pages, I think closer to 230, and it's just too short. Too short for me to get invested in the characters, to get invested in the romance. I feel like there needed to be more time. The plot of this book is that our female character was like cursed as a child. I think it was like, I don't even remember, but I believe like a fairy took half her soul or something like that. When you read the back of the book, it makes it out to seem like that's sort of the focus of what the book is going to be. Towards the middle, we got a plot kind of thrown in our laps about, the exploitation of orphans and, the societal problems of that. And the thing is, this book is so short that I felt like there just wasn't enough time to properly explore this. It did come off as a bit shallow, at least to me. So yeah, I just wasn't as invested as I could have been. And the thing is, all the baseline things that I would have loved were there. It's just like there wasn't enough time to develop them. Next, we have The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, the first book in the Bloodsworn trilogy, a trilogy that is heavily inspired by Viking Scandinavia that involves gods out of legend and the legendary battles. Now, I did film an entire video talking about The Shadow of the Gods, going over what I did enjoy, what I didn't really care for, but if I'm going to sum up my gripes, it's going to boil down to the fact that I just was not invested in any of the characters in any of the three main POVs. I kind of found them to be pretty standard. I knew what their motivations were. Two of them wanted revenge, the other one wanted to prove herself, but I felt like that was it as far as depth was concerned with these characters. I also felt that the story was getting a bit repetitive. I mean, each of the three main characters are warriors, so in each three POVs, there's just fighting and battles over and over again involving people who you don't really know much about or you don't really care. By the end, there wasn't really any element in this book that I could latch onto and really love and feel like I ought to continue the series for it. So yeah. Now, this next book is similar to The Shadow of the Gods in the sense that it is the first book in a trilogy that I will not be continuing on with, and that is The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. Now, I picked this book up because I read The Hexologist last year, loved it. I read The Tainted Cup this year, enjoyed it. And I was in the mood for mysteries that take place within a fantasy world. And The Justice of Kings more or less promised that. People were describing it as sort of like a Sherlock Holmes in a fantasy world. And yeah, I read it, and I can't really say much other than it was just okay. With regards to characters, for instance, Helena. Didn't mind her at all. I didn't have a problem with her as our main character. I do feel that her position, being the assistant to Conrad von Valt, who is sort of our enigmatic protagonist, I felt her perspective was very interesting to approach the story from. However, I did find her just kind of serviceable. I didn't hate her, but I wasn't really all that invested in her. She was just okay. Even von Valt, to be honest, I know he's meant to be sort of brooding and mysterious. I kind of found him to be a bit sullen and just a tad bit boring. With regards to the mystery itself, I ought to have felt more invested. I ought to have felt more excited. I can't help but compare this experience to my experience reading The Tainted Cup, because every time we got a new clue in The Tainted Cup, I got excited. I was like, ooh, how's this going to connect later on in the story? However, whenever we got a new clue, a new revelation in The Justice of Kings, I felt, okay, moving on. With regards to the world, it was basically just medieval Europe. There was a bit of magic. Nothing crazy, nothing all that impressive. And the thing is, I do feel that The Justice of Kings, my reading experience, was impaired a bit because I was kind of comparing it, as I was reading and I wasn't really falling in love with it. I did find myself comparing it a lot to The Tainted Cup and The Hexologist. And I think one thing I've noticed is that it's not enough for me for it to just be a mystery in a fantasy world. The world itself has to be interesting. Because if you've read The Tainted Cup, if you've read The Hexologist, the world building in that in those two stories are just, they're a bit out there. And I think that's something I want more of in my fantasy, not just in my, mystery fantasies. Now, my second last most disappointing read of 2024 goes to The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. We're following a young woman who lives a very introverted life working as a librarian within this empire. However, there's this revolution that is going on, and it reaches the library. In fact, the library starts catching on fire, and she manages to escape with a couple of books, her friend, who is a talking sentient plant, and they travel to the island where she was born, that she grew up for a bit before moving to the empire, or to the main capital. And her plan is to just hide out in her old house until the revolution kind of dies down. When everything settles, she'll go back and then, everything will be as it was. However, while she's there, she's kind of beset by nosy neighbors and all that, and she kind of has to learn to open up and interact with these people, something she has never had to do in the past. It was interesting to see how she adjusted to her new social situation. The fact that she cannot avoid these people, she has to learn to sort of be open and interact with more people. And she also finds romance along the way. A romance that, was quaint. Nothing bad. It wasn't, a horrible romance by any means. I'm not the type of reader that's like, spice? Is there spice? You got spice? I don't need that. I'm a huge fan of the tasteful cutaway. But this one, was just quaint. I mean, there are Georgette Heyer romances that I felt, I squee over more than this one. This one was just fine. I do feel that towards the middle, they were kind of okay. Yeah, a lot of scenes of jam making and, fixing up the house and a lot of renovating. I felt like a lot of that keeps getting repeated. And then towards the latter part, the plot kind of kicks back into gear, and then we just get a lot of events happen quickly after another, and then a lot of side characters come over and then reveal their tragic backstories, and it's just dumping it on our laps again and again. And then I felt that the ending kind of just resolved itself, like, okay, the end ended up becoming a disappointment for me, unfortunately. We'll see if I will continue on with another cozy fantasy. This last book might be my most controversial one, and I must reiterate, this is not a bad book by any means. I just had very high expectations for it. And that is A Shadow in Summer by Daniel Abraham. Don't tell Alan. I picked this book up because of him. This is very much a setup novel. It really felt like that to me when I was reading this book. This book is there to introduce you to the main characters, to the magic system, to the political, social, economic situation within this city. Definitely a type of book that is laying down the pieces on the board that are going to be used later on in the series. This has, a fascinating world, intriguing politics, complex characters. It's just that there was this disconnect for me. Like, I wasn't emotionally drawn. I wasn't as emotionally drawn to the characters or to the story as I ought to have been. That would warrant me, that would warrant it being higher in my regard. With regards to the characters, I mean, my feelings towards them was like on a spectrum. Like, on one end, I really liked, I liked Seedless and then Ota. And I'm glad to know that in A Betrayal of Winter, we will be following him. And then there's Amat, who I know I should care more about, but there was just this emotional disconnect for me. I don't know, it's like, she's complex, but she wasn't as compelling to me as she ought to be. I don't know why. Like, there was just, like I said, an emotional disconnect. And then there's like Liat and Mati, and honestly, I could do without them. If the narrative dropped them, I'll be fine. So, yeah, it was just a spectrum with how I felt about people. The world was interesting. It's a fantasy world that's very East Asian, Asian inspired. And if you are used to a lot of fantasy worlds that are more, European inspired, this could be a breath of fresh air to you. I don't know, I'm kind of used to Asian inspired fantasy worlds. I've read The Spirit Cuts Through Water. I grew up watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, so it just wasn't really, didn't really blow me away. But yeah, still a very interesting world. And then you had the magic system, which for me was the most intriguing part. You have these poets that are able to take abstract ideas and then sort of form them, have them manifest into physical avatars. So that's just going to be very interesting to see how that's explored in later books. But I do feel that I'm not alone in my thoughts, because if you look on the Goodreads rating, this book is like 3.63. It's pretty average. It's a pretty average rating. However, the second book is like, I think, closer to 4 stars. So I think for a lot of people, this series does pick up in book 2. So hopefully that will be my case. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Shadow in Summer. I will move on to the second book. So yeah, those are my most disappointing reads of 2024. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know down in the comments what were your most disappointing books that you've read this year. And hopefully I can start filming the next video soon where I talk about my favorite books. So yeah, stay tuned for that video. And until next time, bye!